There comes a time in every life when pain doesn't come from a stranger or an external storm, but from a person once deeply trusted, valued, even loved. That kind of pain doesn't just sting for a moment. It settles deep into the heart. It leaves behind questions, grief, and emotional weight that cannot be carried alone. You may find yourself smiling in public and breaking in private, trying to understand why someone you gave so much of your heart to could treat it with so little care. You begin to wrestle with emotions that feel impossible to manage. Sadness, confusion, anger, guilt, even shame. But more than anything, you begin to wonder how to move forward without hardening your heart. This message is not about pretending the hurt never happened. It's not about sweeping pain under the rug or convincing yourself that you're unaffected. No, this is about doing what seems impossible, detaching emotionally from someone who wounded you deeply without losing yourself, without becoming bitter, and without stepping outside of God's will. Because there is a way to let go that doesn't break you, it builds you. There is a way to walk away from emotional entanglement and still walk in love. And that way begins and ends with God. God does not call us to live in chains, not to people, not to pain, not to the past. He calls us to walk in freedom, truth, and peace. And when relationships begin to steal that peace, cloud that truth, or bind our hearts to repeated harm, God gently but firmly leads us to a place of detachment, not out of hatred but out of healing, not to reject others, but to protect the purpose He placed inside of us. If you have been holding on, trying to make sense of someone who keeps tearing at your peace, this is your moment to release, not alone, not in anger, but in God's way, with wisdom, strength, and unshakable grace. Emotional pain is one of the deepest kinds of wounds a person can carry. Unlike physical injuries, it doesn't always show on the outside, but it can cripple the heart, disturb the mind, and cloud the soul. Being hurt by people, especially those who were once trusted, loved, or deeply valued, is not only painful but also confusing. It leaves questions in the heart that often have no answers. Why would someone so close cause such pain? How could someone who once spoke words of affection now bring wounds through their actions or silence? These are questions that echo in the hearts of those who suffer silently. But the pain is real, and God knows it intimately. God never promised that life would be free of heartbreak or betrayal. In fact, the Bible speaks of the reality of human relationships and the brokenness that exists in a fallen world. We live among people who themselves are broken, often carrying their own wounds and dysfunctions. Sometimes they project that brokenness onto others, whether knowingly or unknowingly. And while the offense may be severe or subtle, its weight is felt deeply in the soul. Emotional wounds can make a person question their worth, their purpose, or even their faith. But it's important to understand that God does not overlook this pain. He is not distant from it. He does not minimize it or ask anyone to pretend it doesn't hurt. In Psalm 3:18, the scripture declares that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. This is not just a poetic verse, it is a divine assurance. God draws near when hearts are aching. His presence becomes most real when human support fails. He sees the tears cried in silence, the inner battles fought in solitude, and the nights filled with questions that go unanswered. There is a tender place in God's heart for those who are emotionally wounded. He does not dismiss pain. He holds it, tends to it, and promises healing. Still, emotional pain can create a dangerous trap if it is not brought before God. The enemy often uses these moments of vulnerability to whisper lies. Lies that say you are not enough, that you will never be safe, that all people are untrustworthy, or that you must harden your heart to survive. But God's way is different. He does not want the heart to become cold. He does not want the soul to build walls of bitterness or wear armor of resentment. He invites His people into something more powerful: surrender, healing, and transformation. Before emotional detachment can even be considered, the wound must first be acknowledged. There is no healing in denial. There is no strength in pretending. Pain must be brought into the light of God's presence, not to relive it, but to release it. God's healing always begins with truth. Truth about what was felt, truth about what happened, and truth about who He is in the midst of it all. And the truth is this: you were not meant to carry the pain forever. You were not created to live with a wounded identity. You were not designed to be emotionally chained to someone who keeps tearing at your soul. This is where God's way of healing begins. He meets the hurting heart not with judgment but with mercy, not with demands but with grace. And in His presence, the first gentle step toward freedom begins, not by forgetting the pain or suppressing it, but by allowing Him to lift it. Emotional detachment is not the absence of care. It is the beginning of peace. And peace is a gift that God gives to those who dare to bring their broken pieces into His hands. The journey may not be instant, but every step forward is a step toward wholeness. The first step is recognizing that the wound is real, and so is the healer. God is not distant from the pain that others cause. He sees every betrayal, every harsh word, every act of neglect or rejection that wounds the heart. Nothing escapes His attention, not even the silent tears shed in private. There is a great comfort in knowing that God does not miss a single detail of the hurt inflicted by others. His eyes are upon the righteous, and His ears are attentive to their cry. When someone wounds the soul, it might feel like no one truly understands the depth of that pain, but God does. He understands not only what happened, but how it made you feel, how it changed your trust, how it affected your peace. In the book of Isaiah, God describes Himself as a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. This means He is not only aware of emotional pain, He has lived it. He has tasted betrayal. He has felt abandonment. He knows what it's like to be wounded by those closest to Him. That makes Him uniquely able to walk with you through emotional detachment in a way that is both compassionate and powerful. There is no need to explain the pain to Him. He already knows, and in knowing, He offers more than sympathy. He offers healing. Sometimes the greatest lie the enemy uses in moments of pain is the idea that no one sees or cares. But the Word of God makes it clear that the Lord is near. He does not wait for perfection to draw close. He draws near to the broken. His presence is not reserved for the strong, but for the shattered. He does not shame the wounded soul. Instead, He gathers it, binds it, and restores what was lost. The process of emotionally detaching from those who've hurt you begins not with cutting ties in bitterness, but with drawing near to the one who knows the full story. When His presence is near, clarity begins to form, peace begins to return, and the healing journey is no longer something you must walk alone. Forgiveness and emotional attachment are often misunderstood as being one and the same, but they are not. Forgiveness is a command from God, a choice to release a person from the debt of their offense. It is a decision of the will, not a feeling. Forgiveness is about obedience to God, not reconciliation with the one who caused the pain. Emotional attachment, on the other hand, is a connection of the heart that continues to invest in, depend on, or hope for something from the other person. This attachment can persist even when the relationship has become toxic or harmful. God never asks anyone to stay emotionally bound to someone who continues to damage their peace, dignity, or purpose. It is possible to forgive someone fully and still choose to step away. Forgiveness is about releasing bitterness, but detachment is about reclaiming emotional space. It is not an act of cruelty. It is a form of wisdom. It means you no longer allow your emotions to revolve around someone who is unwilling or unable to walk in love, respect, or truth. Detachment does not mean you hate the person. It simply means you no longer allow them to occupy the sacred place in your heart that belongs to peace. The heart is a garden, and what you allow to take root will either nourish you or poison you. Emotional attachment to someone who consistently causes harm becomes a snare to the soul. God calls His people to walk in love, but also in discernment. There is a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. Emotional detachment may look like silence, distance, or boundaries, but at its core, it is a spiritual realignment. It is saying to your soul, you are no longer dependent on this person for validation, joy, or identity. That space now belongs to God alone. When you detach God's way, it is not an act of rebellion, it is an act of reverence. It says, Lord, I trust you more than I trust my emotions. And that trust becomes the first true step toward peace. Letting go is never easy, especially when your heart has been deeply invested. Whether it's a relationship filled with years of memories or a connection that once brought joy, the act of releasing someone emotionally feels like a tearing of the soul. But in God's way, letting go is not just a personal decision, it's an act of obedience. God often calls his people to lay aside not only sin, but also the things that weigh them down. Hebrews 12:1 reminds us to lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. Sometimes that weight is not a habit or a behavior, it is a person, a relationship, an emotional tie that has become a hindrance instead of a help. Obedience to God does not always make sense to the flesh. The heart may argue, the mind may rationalize, but the Spirit speaks with clarity. There are times when the Lord will nudge the soul and say, it's time to release the attachment, time to stop trying to fix what you didn't break, time to let him be God, even in the matters of the heart. Letting go does not mean the past was meaningless. It does not mean the love was fake or the connection wasn't real. It means that the season has shifted, and holding on now causes more harm than good. What once served your growth may now be stunting it. There is a cost to obedience, but there is also a reward. When you let go of what God is asking you to release, you open your hands to receive what he desires to place in your life. Holding on to emotional ties that he is calling you to release only delays your healing and delays your peace. The soul cannot be filled with new strength while it clings to old pain. Letting go is not an act of weakness. It is a demonstration of spiritual maturity. It is saying, God, I choose your will over my comfort. And in that surrender, you will find that his way leads not just to peace, but to restoration far beyond what you thought was possible. One of the most overlooked commands in Scripture is the call to guard the heart. Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. This is not a suggestion, it is a divine instruction. The heart is the wellspring of life, the inner sanctuary where thoughts are formed, emotions are birthed, and decisions take root. When the heart is wounded, left unprotected, everything else begins to suffer. Relationships break down. Peace disappears. Purpose becomes clouded. Emotional detachment in God's way is often a part of guarding that sacred place within. It is not about building walls of bitterness, but about establishing boundaries rooted in wisdom. Many people misunderstand guarding the heart as becoming cold, distant, or indifferent. But in truth, it is an act of spiritual preservation. Just as a garden must be protected from pests to flourish, so must the heart be guarded from influences that bring destruction. Guarding the heart doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop giving unrestricted access to those who misuse it. Emotional access is a gift, not a right. And when someone repeatedly harms or manipulates that access, it becomes not only wise, but necessary to withdraw it. This is not selfishness, it is stewardship. God never intended for anyone to live in emotional chaos. He is a God of peace, and his Spirit leads in order, not disorder. When the heart is unguarded, the wrong people are often allowed to speak into it, shape it, and damage it. But when the heart is guarded through prayer, discernment, and obedience, it becomes a place where God's voice is clear and his peace is present. Emotional detachment is one way to protect that clarity. It silences the noise of those who don't honor your soul and makes room for the voice of God to become louder than the pain. In choosing to guard your heart, you are not closing yourself off. You are inviting God's peace to take root, grow strong, and lead your emotions with divine wisdom rather than human impulse. To love someone does not mean remaining emotionally entangled with them, especially when their presence brings pain instead of peace. God calls his people to love. This is true. But love does not always require closeness. In fact, there are times when love is most powerful when it is practiced from a distance. The world often teaches that love must always involve constant interaction, deep connection, or unconditional access. But God's love is both holy and wise. It does not enable harm, nor does it ignore truth. There are relationships where the healthiest form of love is letting go while continuing to pray, bless, and release the person into God's hands. God's love is not blind. It sees clearly. It discerns. It protects. To love without attachment is to say, I choose to wish you well, but I will not let your dysfunction damage my peace. This is not a lack of grace. It is grace guided by discernment. Jesus himself loved the world, yet he did not entrust himself to everyone. He knew the hearts of people, and he set boundaries even as he walked in compassion. That example speaks to anyone who struggles with guilt for needing distance. Emotional detachment does not mean shutting your heart off. It means offering love without sacrificing your own wholeness. It is possible to love someone and not be in constant contact. It is possible to care deeply and still step away. Love without attachment is mature, grounded, and secure in God's approval rather than another person's validation. It does not demand attention, explanations, or affirmation. It gives what it can, honor, prayer, forgiveness, but it does not keep its soul tied to a place where pain is constantly repeated. God honors that kind of love because it reflects his own nature. He gives freely, yet he does not force connection. He invites relationship, but he never forces himself on the unwilling. In the same way, loving someone without emotional attachment is not rejection. It is freedom. It is choosing peace over proximity, and it is often the most powerful expression of love a person can offer. There is a deep desire in the human heart for justice. When someone causes harm, the pain left behind by betrayal, manipulation, or emotional cruelty often cries out for resolution, for an apology, or for the person to understand the damage they've done. That longing is natural, but if left unchecked, it can become a silent chain that keeps the soul bound to the one who caused the wound. Emotional detachment, when done God's way, includes a deliberate surrender of vengeance. It is the decision to no longer seek revenge, not even in subtle ways like silent treatment, bitterness, or the hope that they get what they deserve. Instead, it places justice fully in the hands of the one who judges righteously. Romans 12:19 declares, "Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, 'It is mine to avenge. I will repay,' says the Lord." This is not a call to ignore evil or to pretend the hurt never happened. It is a call to trust God's justice more than your own, releasing the right to retaliate or even to prove your point is not weakness. It is strength under submission. It is declaring that your healing does not depend on their remorse, but on God's power to restore. When you release someone from your need to see them punished, you release yourself from emotional captivity. There is peace in trusting that God sees all, knows all, and is perfectly just. He doesn't overlook the pain inflicted upon his children, but his justice doesn't always look like immediate consequences or visible payback. Sometimes his justice is quiet, slow, and redemptive. Other times, it involves divine separation and unseen correction. Either way, trusting God means stepping back and allowing him to be the one who deals with those who hurt you. Emotional detachment becomes real and lasting when you no longer feel the need to manage justice yourself. You no longer monitor, compare, or obsess. You let go, not because they deserve mercy, but because you deserve peace. And peace only comes when you trust the outcome to God's hands alone. Emotional detachment, when led by the Spirit, is not a cold withdrawal, but a sacred separation. It is not about becoming indifferent or shutting down your heart. Instead, it is a process of spiritual clarity where your soul begins to realign with God's truth rather than emotional entanglement. There is a difference between shutting someone out in bitterness and stepping away in obedience. When God begins to lead you into detachment, it's not for the purpose of isolation. It's for the purpose of elevation. Sometimes he must separate you not just from a person, but from everything that distorts your identity, your peace, or your dependence on Him. This separation is not driven by ego, pride, or revenge. It is birthed in quiet discernment. It is a moment when your spirit awakens to the fact that staying emotionally tethered to the wrong person is not love. It's bondage. God does not want His people yoked to pain, confusion, or emotional instability. Detachment becomes necessary when closeness starts to compromise your clarity. It is in this spiritual separation that you begin to see the person and the situation with new eyes. Not through the lens of fantasy, guilt, or denial, but through the lens of truth. You begin to see the patterns, the damage, and the repeated compromise. And that truth becomes the catalyst for freedom. Spiritual detachment doesn't make you numb. It makes you aware. It opens your heart to the voice of God and silences the emotional noise that once drowned Him out. In the quiet that follows detachment, you begin to hear His whispers again. You begin to feel His nearness again. The space you once gave to someone who hurt you is now a space for His peace to dwell. This is the holy exchange, releasing what drains you and receiving what restores you. God does not ask for this separation to punish you. He asks for it so He can rebuild you. And sometimes, in order for Him to do a new thing in you, He must first disconnect you from the people who keep pulling you back into what He already delivered you from. Healing is not found in revenge, closure, or the passing of time alone. True healing comes through surrender, through laying your pain, your questions, and your need for understanding at the feet of God. Emotional detachment is not just about walking away from a person, it's about walking toward restoration. But that restoration cannot happen without surrender. Surrender means letting go of your timeline, your desire to fix the past, and your attempts to control how healing happens. It is the moment when you stop trying to force emotional resolution and instead trust God to do what only He can do in your heart. So often, people hold on to their pain, not because they want to suffer, but because letting go feels like losing control. There is a belief that if the hurt is released, the wrong will be forgotten, or the relationship might never make sense. But healing doesn't require understanding. It requires faith. Faith that God knows what you endured. Faith that He will not waste your tears. And faith that He is more interested in your restoration than in giving you all the answers. When you surrender the wound, you give Him permission to work beyond your emotions and into the deeper parts of your soul. God never asks you to suppress your pain. He asks you to hand it over, to cast your cares upon Him, because He truly cares for you. That kind of surrender allows Him to touch places no person ever could. It's where bitterness dies, where peace grows, and where scars begin to fade. You stop needing others to make it right because God becomes your healer and defender. The emotional detachment becomes more than distance. It becomes a divine invitation to be made whole. And in that surrender, you begin to walk lighter. You begin to see more clearly. And the same God who allowed the separation now begins to rebuild what was broken. Not with old pieces, but with something entirely new, entirely holy, and entirely yours. There is a powerful peace that comes when you no longer feel the need to prove your point or seek closure from those who have hurt you. The flesh often craves validation, words that affirm your side of the story, an apology that makes the pain feel acknowledged, or some kind of justice that settles the score. But walking with God requires a different kind of strength. It requires choosing peace over pride and inner freedom over outward vindication. Emotional detachment becomes transformative when you no longer wait for them to understand or accept your pain in order for you to move forward. You stop needing the final word, and instead, you allow peace to be your final answer. When the Spirit of God begins to lead your heart, you come to realize that the need for constant explanation is often a sign of unrest within. But peace is not dependent on how someone responds. It is anchored in how God sustains you. Philippians 4:7 speaks of a peace that surpasses all understanding, which means it does not always come with resolution or clarity. It comes from knowing that God is with you, that He knows the truth, and that your healing does not rely on human approval or recognition. You no longer fight battles with your words or your emotions. You learn to be still and let the Lord fight for you. Detaching emotionally from someone doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop carrying. You release the heavy burden of needing to be heard, justified, or affirmed by someone who may never be capable of giving that to you. And in doing so, you gain something far greater than validation. You gain rest. The heart that is led by peace walks differently. It listens less to drama and more to God's whisper. It reacts less and prays more. It stops striving and begins abiding. You don't need to defend your heart when God is guarding it. You don't need to fight to be seen when the one who sees everything is already on your side. Peace becomes your strength and silence becomes your victory. Not every relationship is meant to last forever. Some people enter your life for a season, and when that season ends, holding on to them begins to cost more than it gives. As God begins to shift your life and lead you into new places spiritually, emotionally, or even physically, not everyone will be able or willing to go with you. It's painful when you realize that someone who once walked closely with you no longer fits where God is taking you. But this isn't always a reflection of failure or rejection. Sometimes it's simply divine separation. God is intentional with his assignments, and he removes certain connections not to harm you, but to protect your calling. Clinging to people who no longer align with your purpose can lead to frustration, fusion, spiritual stagnation. What once felt like connection may begin to feel like conflict. Where there was once unity, there may now be resistance. These are often signs that God is transitioning you. He may be calling you higher, asking you to walk in deeper obedience, calling you to greater purity, and not everyone will want to walk that path. Emotional detachment is not just about protecting your heart, it's about honoring your calling. It means you are willing to let go of what is familiar in order to embrace what is holy. Jesus experienced this as well. Even among his disciples, not all remained with him until the end. At one point, many turned away because they couldn't accept the depth of his message. And still, he didn't chase after them. He continued in obedience, knowing that his mission could not be compromised by emotional ties. The same is true for anyone called by God. There comes a point when you must choose between comfort and calling. Detaching emotionally from those who no longer align with your spiritual path is not arrogance or isolation, it is wisdom. It is the decision to walk with God more than you walk with people. And when you choose his direction over human attachment, you gain not only clarity, but the strength to move forward in purpose, unburdened and unbound. There comes a moment when the soul must make a decision to continue craving closeness with someone who harms your peace, or to choose the path of wholeness that God offers. Emotional attachment can become deceptive. It feels like loyalty, love, or faithfulness, but at times it's just fear in disguise. Fear of being alone, fear of losing connection, fear that you'll never feel that way again. But God does not call his children to stay emotionally tied to what is draining their identity. He calls them to wholeness, and wholeness often requires separation. Not just physical distance, but emotional release. Choosing wholeness over closeness is one of the most difficult but freeing decisions you can ever make. It's easy to confuse being needed with being valued. Some people stay attached to relationships that are emotionally exhausting because they've learned to equate sacrifice with love. But God's love does not come with manipulation, control, or constant emotional upheaval. It brings rest. It brings peace. He does not call anyone to relationships that continually chip away at their worth. The truth is, if someone cannot respect your boundaries, your healing, or your God-given identity, then the cost of staying close is far too high. Your emotional health matters to God. Your ability to walk in freedom matters. Sometimes you must choose to be whole, even if it means walking alone for a season. God desires to fill the empty places that others were never meant to satisfy. When you detach from someone who's hurting you, it may feel like loss, but in reality, it's an opening, a space for God to pour in his healing, his joy, and his affirmation. Wholeness is not the absence of pain, but the presence of divine peace. It is knowing who you are, even without their approval. It is living from a place of fullness, not from desperation. Emotional detachment. God's way is never rooted in pride or spite. It is rooted in truth. The truth that you are worthy of love that does not hurt, peace that is not temporary, and relationships that reflect the heart of the Father. There is a power that rises within you when you let go of what has broken you and embrace what God is building in you. Emotional detachment is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of something holy. It's where ashes are exchanged for beauty, where mourning gives way to joy, and where heaviness is replaced by a garment of praise. When you release the people who have wounded your heart into God's hands, you give Him space to strengthen your spirit. And in that strength you rise, not with bitterness, not with pride, but with quiet confidence that comes from walking with the one who heals. Isaiah 40:31 promises that those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. That is the promise for those who choose God's way. Emotional detachment is not a free fall into isolation. It is a lifting into clarity, a soaring above the pain, a deeper communion with the God who restores what people tried to ruin. You are not defined by who left, who hurt you, or who failed to see your worth. You are defined by the one who calls you chosen, beloved, and whole. Letting go does not make you empty. It makes you available. Available for new strength. Available for divine connections. Available for peace that is not shaken by who stays or who leaves. In God's hands, nothing is wasted, not even the pain. He uses it to refine, to teach, to purify, and to prepare you for what is next. Rising above is not about proving anything to anyone. It is about walking in the freedom that comes from full surrender. It is about choosing to live healed, even if you were never given an apology. It is about letting your silence speak peace, letting your steps speak purpose, and letting your life reflect the grace of a God who brought you through it all. You rise because He raised you. You move forward because He made a way. And you detach, not in bitterness, but in power. The power of knowing who holds your heart now. You are not called to remain tethered to pain. You are not obligated to stay emotionally bound to someone who keeps injuring your spirit. God's way is higher. His healing runs deeper. His peace is stronger than any attachment you must let go of. If someone has caused repeated harm and your heart has been left bleeding behind a smile, know this: you are not abandoned, you are not forgotten, and you are not weak for choosing to step away. In fact, it takes more strength to release in love than to cling in fear. God never asked you to carry the weight of brokenness alone. He never designed your soul to be anchored to relationships that rob your joy or compromise your purpose. His desire is not just that you survive, but that you thrive. In wholeness, in truth, and in peace. Detaching emotionally doesn't mean you failed. It means you are finally listening to the Spirit instead of the noise of guilt, fear, or obligation. You are honoring the sacredness of your own heart. And as you walk away, not in bitterness, but in wisdom, know that you are walking toward something greater. You are walking into a future God has prepared without the chaos that once defined your days. The absence of certain people is not a curse. It's a clearing where new peace will grow, new strength will rise, and new purpose will flourish. You don't have to look back anymore. You don't have to replay conversations or wonder if you did enough. You gave your heart, and now God is giving you healing. Walk forward, not chained by the past, but carried by grace. The God who saw your pain is the same God who is now writing your healing. And what He's building in you is far greater than what you had to release. You are free, you are whole, and you are never walking alone.